Courtney, did you get that firmware stuff sorted out with your road?
What was the problem with the road? What did you say?
There was a firmware update that didn't.
Oh, yes. I had to send it to them, and they had to send me another one. I think there was a poison pill in 1.0.7 that prevented it from upgrading again after it does that update. But they won't admit to it, so maybe not. But once you're past that one, the updates have gone fine. Get on to them about their recording format. Made some strange choices for their folder structures.
They still haven't fixed that?
Nope. Every new recording's in a new folder, and it's titled the same as mix. All the files have the same name.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion, your questions about media and virtual production. Our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about our NAB coverage. We have almost 50 volunteers. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to figure out what we're all going to do. This is our last day for a chance to sign up for it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're planning. We're going to get your input on what you want to see. And we're going to keep on figuring it out. I will give you more updates over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to it. It looks like it's going to be a pretty big party. So anyway, so stay tuned for that. A reminder that you can ask questions early. Our recommendation is before 5:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time when you can. A bunch of us are getting together at between 6 and 6:15 and kind of going through your questions and trying to make sure that we have the best answers. And so if you're a panelist, you can actually just jump in for the 6 to 6:30 discussion and then jump out. So if you feel like being part of that, it's more of for those of you who have been around for a long time, it really feels like the first 2 months of Office Hours as we kind of go through those questions and work through those. So that's for the panelists, and for anyone else who wants to watch, you can go ahead and jump in and be part of those early conversations. But if you ask those questions early, it gives us a lot more time to think about them. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Keely?
Yes, our first question comes from Paul Buchan in Columbus, Ohio, and they ask, what programs would you recommend to remote into headless Mac minis? Lately, it seems like every OS update is requiring me to reapprove permissions, which requires me to connect a monitor and keyboard.
Go ahead, Guy.
You're probably going to want to use Apple's regular client, but the one that I've been playing with in addition to Parsec, which I kind of gave up on, they did come up with a newer version since I last tried it out, but the first iteration a couple of months ago was a dumpster fire. So here's what I'm using now, which is Jump Desktop. So this is my PC. You can see I got a couple Mac Minis and another MacBook Pro. So I double click. Fires it up. I got Zoom ISO running here. I got Memo Live running here. So if I want to fire up a lower third, I can fire up a lower third, and you can see that it just pops across the top. So it's nice having my Macs in another location. I could take control of them from my PC, and so these can be living in a rack, and that does the trick for me. Give it a roll. It's not too expensive. Jump Desktop.
Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say Parsec, and that's what I'm using, and it's working well for me. So I do recommend at least giving it a shot.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, the web server works perfect for me, but I'm also at home. If you're doing something more remote, you'll probably want something different. And I just love it because I have my Intel Mac sitting right here, and my Mac M1 that's downstairs, and I can just go over here and do what I need to do before I even think about going downstairs, and then I can get that all set up and come back.
Next, go ahead, Guy. You're going to.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Alexander if he was having any issues with the audio. That was the challenge that I was having with Parsec on the Mac. Is it working fine for you with the drivers? Can you bring in and hear your audio?
That's actually one thing I have not tested. It's just been purely just using it just for accessing something on the computer, but I haven't tested audio, so that's a good point.
Gotcha.
Next question.
Our next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. And he asks, what Mac OS utility can provide graphical interface for detailed OS-level firewall configuration?
I don't know how many of us actually do that with the Mac. The Mac has a lot of its own protections built into it. And usually for the kind of work that I've done for the last probably 15 years, we've had firewalls that are external to the Mac. So the routers that we use have their own firewall systems. And so it's very rare, and I think it's very rare for a Mac user to do very much. One of the things that some of us use is Little Snitch. Little Snitch will just look at all. It's not a firewall app, but what it does do is it'll show you every piece of traffic going in and out of your Mac. So if you have Little Snitch on there and you're running it, it'll just show that, and you can say at any point in time, cut that block, just block that traffic, and it'll close it up. So it's kind of an easy. And it can cause some damage. You'll find that you'll turn it on and suddenly apps don't work, so like a firewall would. But you're closing up those ports because you don't want to communicate with those anymore. So you have to be careful with it. But a lot of folks like things like Little Snitch to go in and kind of find those things and watch that traffic and control it from there. Next question.
Our next question comes from Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. When uploading original video to Facebook, is there a way to do so without auto-generated captions? They get in the way of my lower thirds, which are more important than the audio on my sports clips.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a way to disable them. I doubt it, and I think that's in part because lower thirds and captions, the conflicting areas come from the fact that in the U.S. at least, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed back, I think in the 70s, required broadcasters to make those closed captions available. So when people turn them on, people who have auditory...
I think these are, though, for the Facebook stuff. I mean, it's not required for Facebook to do that, though.
Is there a way to turn them off then? No. I have never seen it. And we have to protect for that. And I've actually had clients where they said it's going to be important to have those captions on there. And I've actually moved my lower third to a different area. It's no longer a lower third, but it's some kind of text that appears in a different area, so there isn't a conflict.
Yeah, I mean, so the big thing is that the general behavior for Facebook is that what they found is when you're going through a feed and you see a video, you're much more likely to click on it. People don't want to hear they don't want the audio to automatically turn on, but they kind of want to know what they're getting themselves into before they click on it. And so as a result, the behavior that was the best for Facebook or for the person posting the video was to have those captions showing up across the bottom, so that the user could make an intelligent decision without turning the audio on. And so as a result, the entire pipeline is built around that. They want, in general, Facebook wants the user of the app to have the expectation of captions. And so the result is they make it very hard for you to turn them off. They make it impossible for you to just turn them off because they want every video to have those down below, so that the user has the expectation of seeing those, because while it may depress that individual's view count, it also makes if everyone turns it off, or a lot of people turn it off, then it creates a frustrating experience for the user within Facebook, which is what Facebook's trying to avoid. So I don't think that there's any way to turn those things off. The user can always turn them off, but I don't think there's any way for you to do it. We usually refer to a lot of this stuff as debris. So there's the debris that is being added by whatever the service is on top. And what we do is we tend to build debris masks around our videos. And we go, okay, there's going to be these stupid little hearts and things that are popping up on one side. There's going to be this coming off, and we watch those animations. And then we build a mat that just says, it's the guide that we put over top of our videos. And then we just make sure that everything that we do that's graphical happens outside of the debris as best we can. And that helps to, so a lot of times, as Bill said, a lot of our captions moved to the middle of the screen to the one side, that they just pop in and out. So typically on the left side of the screen, you'll notice that you'll see captions that are popping up in these high points on the screen. And that's largely driven by the debris that's created by the social systems. Next question.
Our next question comes from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Can the recording function in Audio Hijack be controlled externally, perhaps with a Stream Deck or companion?
The answer is yes, not probably directly, but if you hit Command R on Audio Hijack, you will get, it'll start the session. So that starts the session. If you hit Command K, it will stop and start. It says in the book, in their manual, that it's stop record, but it's actually toggle record. So once you start the session, if you hit Command K, you can toggle the record on and off. So as a result, you could take those keystrokes and put them into Stream Deck. So that would be probably the easiest way to do it. I don't think there's any direct hooks to Audio Hijack, but using those keystrokes, you should be able to define keys within your Stream Deck. Next question.
Our next question comes from panelist Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC. What is the difference in size between Super 35mm and full-frame camera sensors?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, those two designations came from 35mm film, the stuff with the sprocket holes in the side of it. And Super 35 was a horizontal format that went, as you can see here, as for film traveling through a film camera for motion picture work. The Super 35 took up 3 perfs, so it was a way to get widescreen recording on 35mm film for motion picture work. Full frame refers to still image, where it goes horizontally on the film stock. So you can see there the difference in size between those two sensors. It's probably about a third of the full frame for Super 35 is a good rule of thumb. And if you want to see the difference in sizes between the different sensor formats and digital cameras, you can see the comparative sizes between the full frame 35, the Super 35, which is more of a horizontal 235 format, APS-C, the 1-inch, the 2/3 inch, and the 1/3 inch. And so you can see that those 1/3 inch and 2/3 inches, which you see in a lot of 3-chip cameras or single-chip CMOS cameras, are much smaller and give you much more depth of field, and you get a lesser depth of field the larger the sensor. So that's my take on the differences.
Good, Tom.
With over twice the surface area full frame provides a wider angle of view and a shallower depth of field with any given lens.
Yeah, and the APS and Super 35 are not the same size, but very, very close. So when you look at cameras that have that there, those are things to kind of think about as well. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
This may be getting too much in the weeds, but I guess I don't understand the technical reasonings for the depth of field differences in the sensors. Why is that?
Yeah, it has to do with the when it's projected, it's basically how. See if I can. This is going to be a very simplified explanation of this process, but essentially what you're looking at is there is a cone that is kind of produced for every pixel there. And the main thing is that cone, there's only one place that's truly in focus. Like there's at any given time, things look like they're in focus, but that's because this cone is at a certain, it's basically, if the cone is really thin like this, then what we perceive as focus is, maybe up to here and here. You think about the cone going both directions, but the cone, there's a range here. This is your depth of field. And that's that range. And that means that the cone is so thin that the change between being in focus and out of focus is less than a pixel. So that's when we think of things as being, and that's not even technically correct, because for every pixel on a CMOS sensor, there's actually a group of pixels there. So nothing's really in focus on a CMOS sensor, but we'll just keep it going that way. So what makes this cone thinner? A smaller target makes it thinner. So a smaller sensor makes that cone thinner, which increases your depth of field. Your aperture, so as your aperture gets smaller, it's going to make that cone thinner. And your focal length will make that cone thinner, and so, or thinner or wider as it works through there. And so what you really want to think about that cone going in and out as far as where it goes. It's a very simplified way of talking about this, and we could probably do a whole second hour on depth of field. But thinking about it in not so much that something's in focus and there's a group of it that's in focus. It's just that cone is so thin that it's less than a pixel, and so when you make that target smaller, for what the information that's coming into that is much straighter, and as a result, it's going to be it's going to stay in focus for a longer period of time. So as you increase that sensor size, you're increasing, you're widening that cone out where things will drop out of focus a lot faster perceptually. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it's referred to as circle of confusion, and that's why it's so difficult to explain. It's
confusing. Yeah. So, and again, what I'm talking about, what I just said there is not technically correct, but what it does is it explains to you what you're doing with those things. As you close that aperture up, as you create a smaller target, it's the easiest way to think about what you're doing and how and the combination of those things start to make more sense. Next question.
Our next question comes from panelist Laura Thompson in Texas. Zoom fatigue we've established in this group, but how can it be avoided when you're a participant that has no control over the quality, what you can do in a 10-hour day and all those classes in order to make it easier on yourself?
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, for me, this comes down to you got to define yourself as a participant. And if you're saying you have absolutely no control and you're just watching it, the only thing I've ever found that's successful is to record it and play it back later and increase the speed so that it won't be so darn boring. If you're lucky enough to have access as a participant where you're active and you can go on, you can show up and follow one of the rules we've articulated here a lot, which is when you're on camera, if you want to kind of pop and be a good participant, be yourself only 20% more. Which is just to say you cannot come to the show with no energy, no enthusiasm, and whatever. And those 10-hour classes are notable for some of the worst examples of people just droning on and on. In fact, in Arizona, they had a process that I thought was going to be great. They let us do I had a driving infraction many, many years ago. They said, you can take your driver training classes online. I said, this is great, man. I'll go in there and I'll watch the things and I'll get through it real fast. They had some mandate that each class had to last a certain amount of time so you could absorb all the information and pass the test in the first 5 minutes. But then you had to sit there for 15 more minutes because somebody had mandated you had to be there for 20 minutes to fulfill the legal requirement. Worst thing I ever went through.
Sorry. I find government rules in that area to be just the most insanely frustrating thing. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
You can for audio, you can reverse engineer your audio. So if you get somebody that's in a bouncy room or they're causing feedback or anything like that, you can take it out of your computer. You can put it into something that can process it, maybe do a feedback destroyer on it, or maybe do some compression or anything like that, and then bring that into your ears. That way you're not going to get the audio fatigue. For video fatigue, this is the one thing I love to do in a lot of shows is this right here. My PTZ camera can set it up so I can give myself a little blur, and so you still see me, but yet you're not seeing me, whatever I'm doing here. And if I'm not the main speaker, this is a great way to stay in the room without staying in the room.
Yeah, if you're going to something over and over again, I will admit that, and I think it's partially because of this show, I just will not put up with bad audio and bad video. If I'm not required to watch it, I will not watch it. NPR puts on a phoner and I turn it off. I just don't have no interest in listening to anything that is of low quality anymore. And if I'm in a show that has that, I have to admit that I'm pretty scathing about it, and I'm pretty persistent. Like, hey, why is the audio so bad? This class would be a lot better if the audio was better. It'd be really good if we had great cameras, so that we can actually see the person. So I find that shame and ridicule are pretty effective, especially when done in large numbers. You'd be surprised, I admit that I have a tendency to I get, a group of people together. But if you have 5 or 6 students constantly, needling a instructor for better audio and video, they'll fix it. It doesn't have to be brute force, just little needles. And they know that every class, they're going to be reminded about how bad they look and sound. it will drive them crazy until they just go ahead and buy whatever they need to do to make that go away. So small amounts of pain can oftentimes move things forward. And I would highly recommend. I worked in areas where people get things better because they have meetings with me all the time. They finally said, well, I got to get a better camera. so like they were noticing the difference inside of that. But we can be the best solution, the best example of how to move things forward, number one. And number two is, don't let people slide on it. And it's our time and our ears and our eyes that we have to deal with. So let them know. Next question.
Our next question comes from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. With a Logitech MX Keys keyboard and companion mouse, you can switch between 3 computers. Is there any better mouse keyboard solution to control multiple keyboards?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I've tried those. Those are Bluetooth switchers that they have that'll switch between, you pair them with the 3 different computers, and then you have a button that you can switch between which computer you're controlling. Another solution was just to get you a hardware KVM switch, which you can use any keyboard into. And here's one that's 4 computers into one set of USB outlets and 1 monitor outlet. Now, that does switch the output monitor, but you don't necessarily have to use the output monitor if you've got your outputs from your 3 computers to 3 separate monitors that are in front of you at the same time. But you can use something like this, and it has a little button there you can see to switch between your different inputs, and it has an indicator on which computer you're controlling when you hit that button.
Yeah, and I use one that's very similar to the one that Courtney just showed there. It's got front buttons. I chose front buttons so I could stack stuff on top of it. so I have front buttons there. And again, like Courtney said, I don't use it to switch my monitors. I just use it to switch my keyboards. And I typically want 4 options of things that I can select. So I couldn't use that keyboard. And again, Bluetooth, I want things to be wired on my day-to-day basis, and then I use Bluetooth for convenience. Go ahead when I need it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
And NDI also has a KVM solution. That's absolutely free, so you can install it on the machine to see how it works for you. And if you don't like it, rip it out.
Next question.
Paul Buchan is back from Columbus, Ohio, and he asks, any thoughts on the new NDI-capable cameras from JVC? And there's a link in the comments.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it looks interesting. It's kind of funny because they made all this hubbub like it's the world's first JVC NDI camera, but a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, as a matter of fact, Panasonic came out with the CX350, which is basically the same camera, $2,000, $3,000 cheaper. So the JVC is $59.95, and you can find the Panasonic CX350 for about $39.95. So same 20x zoom, you got HD SDI out, 4K, 1-inch sensor. So that's the cool thing about these cameras. If you need that form factor for, rocker zoom where you've got HD SDI out, it's a cool camera. The NDI on the CX350 is NDI HX. It's not full NDI. And so when you're pairing it with something like a UE150, they match pretty well. A lot of people take the SDI signal to get the better color. And so that's what I'm curious on this camera. I dug through the specs to see if they had NDI HX3, which I believe it is. It's not full NDI from what I can tell.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was digging through there too. It is HX 4K 60 frames a second, but there's something about, I think it's something about you can't record and use HDX or NDI at the same time. The other thing, and Guy, you may be able to key in on this because there was some conflict on the page. How does it come out? Because my understanding is you need a USB dongle to do Ethernet or Wi-Fi. And then they were showing a whole bunch of cheap Amazon USB drives on there.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've seen those with their solutions in the past. So that's the interesting thing. If I were them, I'd be talking about the other capabilities that it has, what they call connected cam, which is the ability for it to send SRT. And so one of the big deals in this one is that it's got H.265 SRT, which is a big deal. So everybody's all like, oh, it's got NDI. And I'm like, the cooler thing about it is SRT and HEVC, because for like the NAB discussion that we'll be having in a little bit, how would we get out of a busy trade show floor? This camera would be pretty dang awesome. In fact, I know Craig Yanagi over at JVC. Maybe we should give him a ring and see if we can get a couple of these for the floor.
Probably. Here's my experience of JVC is generally heavy on features and low on quality. That's the problem that I really have with them, is that that usually when you look at the chips and when you look at the output, it's never as good as a lot of other cameras in the same price range, but they have lots of features. They're always on the front edge of adding the next feature to their cameras. But when I actually look at the video that comes out, which I think is the most important part of a camera, is what it actually outputs. I find myself oftentimes frustrated with grain structure and overall color quality within the JVCs, and so that is the problem that I have with those. It's not so much that whether it has NDI or not, but I think that's going to be that's always the challenge with their products. I think that you always go to the JVC booth to see what's new, what's possible with a camera. Like, what can I put into the camera? Because they've added live streaming from the camera. They've added, in the past, they've added all kinds of storage options, all kinds of connection options. And so what they solve in a lot of ways, in my opinion, is, I just have all the stuff that I want to do with a camera and I want it to be really flexible and do those things. What I feel like they don't do very well is really focus on the basics of making just a great sensor and pipeline within the cameras themselves. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there was a conference last week, ACM, which is for cable providers, the what do you call them, cable access, and Boeing software was there, JVC was there as well, and I happened to just be in a Zoom meeting with Oliver, and he walked over to the JVC booth, and we got to see their PTZ cameras, and they're controlling them remotely. And so this box that Boeing was showing off would be a good mate, where you've got a switch that has power over Ethernet, and you can run a couple PTZ cameras. You can have operators on something like this new model, but it all goes into a switch. And so your Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable is almost discardable. It's so cheap to run. So in situations like that, where you want to run one operator on a camera, 2 PTZs, I think it's a decent solution. So it's worth looking into. If you're going to NAB, they have great reps in the booth to answer all those questions.
Absolutely. I will say the booth is great. At NAB, it's usually in the central hall right below Panasonic, and I don't know where they're going to put it this year because things have changed around, but I go to the booth every year because, again, if I want to see what you can do with a camera, and what I will say is JVC thinks outside of the box of all the things that they could possibly add to it. And it's always been, the image quality hasn't been something I've been happy with, but all the features, it's always really cool to see what they can provide for the market that they serve. Next question.
Our next question comes from Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania. I have Zoom Room connector licenses to bring Polycom rooms into Zoom. Is there a way to bridge H323 rooms into Teams?
There is, but I don't think through the Zoom connection that you have there. So I think that you might be able to figure out some way to take it out and then put it back in. You're going to have latency. You're going to have double connections to the reflectors, and there's going to be a lot that's going to happen if you're trying to use a Zoom connection to H323 rooms, but you can look at things like Polycom's Real Connect. That's going to be a cloud service that's going to allow you to connect the Polycom service directly to Teams. So you want to probably take a look at that. Next question.
Our next question comes from Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC. Does providing Apple ProRes record support in third-party devices require a license? Is this why we still don't have ProRes recording in ATEM switchers, or is it perhaps related to processing power?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It's related to processing power and bandwidth, because remember, those ISO channels all have to be recorded, and with just a mini Pro ISO, you're talking about 5 video channels. If it was 444 ProRes, that's a lot of bandwidth to push out that USB connector to your external hard drive, and your external hard drive would have to have a write speed fast enough to record that kind of bandwidth. So the ATEM outputs H.264 on its at 70 megabits, I believe, MP4 for its 4 ISO outputs, and the program output is H.264 at whatever you've got the streaming output set to as far as bitrate goes. So that's the way they chose to do it. And at 70 megabits, those ISOs are pretty good. They're pretty high quality. You're not going to notice the resolution of the blocking or anything like that usually on your output. And you can convert them later to ProRes 444 if you want to, and they'll come out pretty clean. And then you can control the individual channel levels.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's been a point of contention for a long time, because if you're on the board, you'll notice that all the Apple people want access to B-roll and all the ATEM people want access to ProRes, and everybody wants everything else. There's intellectual property issues there, and this discussion is too big for us to ever solve here, but it's still an issue. We would love it to be working in a world where everybody got completely along with each other's IP and that everything could be on everything, but that's just not the world we live in right now.
I think that the biggest issue is storage space. I don't think that Blackmagic uses ProRes in other places. I don't think that there's a real issue with the records there. I think that they'd be able to use it without any real, and I don't think it's processing power. It takes less processing power to write ProRes than it does to write H.264. So I think that it really is just the fact that they're looking at a specific solution that's going to allow them to put as much as possible. I think they've decided that that's good enough for that at the 70 megs a second, which is considerably less than ProRes at a reasonable rate. For instance, ProRes proxy is just a throwaway format. So while you look at that as a lower rate, the quality on ProRes proxy is so bad. It really is designed as proxy, like you cannot use it. And so if you want higher quality at a lower rate, you really have to start at LT and go up from there. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you have any opinions about ProRes LT and whether that would actually be worth it in the ATEM line?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be great to see ProRes. And it used to be that you'd see ProRes LT and 422. A lot of us then complained that we weren't getting higher versions, the HQ and 444 and so on and so forth. And so those things kind of backed away, from that. But the LT is a great format for a lot of run-of-the-mill records. We've used it for a lot of corporate stuff. Next question.
Our next question is from Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm traveling to Germany and the UK next week. Do you have recommendations for mobile bandwidth options, i.e. for personal streaming?
I would say if you're going to both Germany and UK and you want to use one modem, you're probably looking at Vodafone, or you can make it a higher you can try to buy into the higher version of T-Mobile. So T-Mobile will work almost everywhere. It just doesn't work very well. And that's because you have to buy it'll, like your general T-Mobile will just get you all over the world. You can check your texts, you can send some basic emails. Everything's really slow. You can't stream from it. Now, my experience has been mostly that when we're in the UK, we've mostly used the little MiFis that are made by 3. 3 was the one that had the best coverage, the widest coverage, and fastest coverage. I used to have an apartment in London, and so for the company, and so so that's what we used for that. But when we go to Germany, obviously that's not a German coverage, and Vodafone will be in both countries, and so Vodafone's probably the one-off for both of those, and T-Mobile obviously comes is sourced out of Vodafone or out of Germany, so you probably will get good coverage there. So those are some of the options that you have when you go into Europe. Next question.
Our next question is from Andre Dole from Berlin, Germany. What is the panelist experience with Livestream Studio 6? I have a spare license and just found out about NDI and the layering possibilities in GFXs. How about comparison to OBS on a Mac M1 Max?
Good guy.
Yeah, unfortunately, the team hasn't been updating that software as rapidly as we would like. So as you have like a vMix, it's gotten super popular, and they've got the monthly recurring revenue coming in. After the purchase by Vimeo, I think it's kind of subsided quite a bit. If you have the license already, you can see here I've got it running on a PC. As far as the cool thing about it is those graphics are already pre-built. So if you wanted a lower third, there's a nice templates here that you can just add them in. And then when you want to pull them in, you could say, was that graphic 3? Push that in. So then you can just pull them up and pull them back out. But there is some neat compositing in here too, where you can build different GFX. You can go into these editors and you can, move stuff around wherever you want it. So it's a pretty powerful app, and it does have, so you're seeing me on NDI right now, so you can suck in NDI, and it does do 4K. I've used it just as an encoder, pure encoder. So it does have the ability to do Ultra HD. The other thing that's pretty interesting is that you can turn it into an RTMP server. So you can actually bring in RTMP feeds. The one thing I was finding that was missing is the ability to bring in SRT, which I solved with SRT mini server. So SRT mini server converts the inputs to NDI. So I can go SRT into SRT mini server, then into Livestream Studio through NDI. And so that's how I've used it. And it for what it is, it's still pretty powerful. And you do have these NDI outputs that you could add in. So you can say, I want to add in program, or where's my NDI feed? NDI 1. And so I can bring stuff in and kick it back out too. So even just as a way of building multi-views and things like that, it's pretty neat that it can do that. So it's still cool software for what it is.
it's the code is not efficient. That's why they're not updating it. So they're gonna, I wouldn't commit a long-term experience with it. I mean, using it here and there makes sense. The quitting without saving and warning, or without warning, for me was the killer. That we kept on pushing to do things, and then it suddenly just disappear. And we come back on and we try to get it to run again. So OBS on a Mac has so many variable issues that we don't really consider it a viable option. The only two that we really pay a lot of attention to for software-based Mac editing is Memo Live and Ecamm. And we've seen, again, a couple idiosyncrasies with Ecamm that have probably led me to not jump on it real quick. Just some resolution and processing issues that we've seen in a couple in our own stuff as I've tested it, where it gets into some states that we're not what we want. so the only one that I've been using on the Mac is Memo Live because of those various things with none of them are perfect and they're all kind of there, but I would say in the scrum of what you have for software-based editing on the Mac, I'm still leaning towards Memo Live, and it took poor Oliver like a decade to get me to come around. So go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Oliver was just up at our store, was it yesterday? The day before. And I've learned some cool things about Memo Live, but back to the live stream studio stuff, you do have to be very aware of what your CPU load is. And there is a little indicator in the top right. You want to be very careful about not uploading this or overriding it to 99, because that's, like Alex said, that's where it just will quit. And so if you're building graphics plus you're streaming, because there is, when you go to output, where is it? Oh, I'm in the graphics.
And I don't think it's taking much advantage of the M1 architecture. I mean, it's just not getting updated. And the problem is the code is so inefficient that I think it'd be very hard for them to take full advantage of the platform. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, when you're connected, you can say add in, I'm not logged in, but normally when I'm streaming out, it'll say right here the 4K, 720, 1080. So it's kind of inefficient because it'll push 5 streams out. And so you really got to watch, if you're using it as an encoder, you really got to watch what you're doing as far as how many feeds you're pushing out. Because you'll be watching that CPU and all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's at 80%. Like I'm in the danger zone. So be super careful with it.
And I would recommend never doing multi-level streaming of resolutions on the same computer that you're doing your video on. Like generally, if you're going to do all the steps in the ladder, you need a dedicated computer for that isn't doing anything other than that process. Next question.
Our next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he asks, let's say you wanted to stream an SDI program output into a Zoom webinar. Would a BMD or Blackmagic Design web presenter be the device that you would use?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It certainly could be the device that you would use. It'll do that for you. There's cheaper ways to get around it. You could use the Blackmagic Design SDI to HDMI converter, which looks like that. And then you could go online at Amazon and get you one of these HDMI video capture cards, which converts the HDMI to USB and then appears as a USB webcam on any computer you plug it into, and then you'd go into Zoom with that. So those two things plugged together would give you the same thing as the web presenter does. The web presenter is a little more versatile in that it can stream directly without having to go into Zoom. So you might look at that if you're looking to stream directly, but if you're going to go into Zoom, the second choice with the two adapters will certainly do the job.
Yeah, and it's a really stable way to do it. And I believe I think that the larger web presenter will do 4K in and then do the scale down and put it out and everything else. It's been really happy with those devices. Next question.
Our next question comes from Philip Oler in Katona, New York. NDI or Video Siphon? Which protocol is better for recording Zoom ISO?
And the illustrious answer is it depends. It depends on what you're doing. Are you recording locally or are you recording remotely? So if any time that you are recording or you're trying to send something from one part of the computer to the same part to another part of the same computer, you want to use Siphon. It has a lower overhead as far as the CPU usage, and it's going to be a lower latency. There's a whole bunch of advantages to using Siphon when you're going inside the computer. If you're going to send this to another computer to do a record, then you have to use NDI. So that's the decision you want to make: is am I doing something to the computer, the home computer that I'm working at, or am I sending it to another computer? So if it's at home, it's a Siphon, and if it's a remote computer, it's NDI. Next question.
Our next question is from Ronnie Huffsey in Tromsø, Norway. Recently got a few bird dog cameras that seem to be continuously restarting. What could be the reason?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I would check to see if you're powering them over PoE, if you're getting enough power, because that can be an issue. I've had that happen with those cameras where there wasn't enough power, and so they would just they wouldn't know what to do, especially when you went to move them, and it drew more power. That could be one. Depending on the firmware you're on, you might want to back down one, because sometimes they frequently put out beta, so you want to be careful about what firmware that you're using on a production camera.
Yeah, I would highly recommend you always want to provide more power than the camera needs. So if it asks for PoE, think about PoE plus. If it asks for PoE plus, think about something that might support PoE plus plus, and make sure that you have just plenty of headroom there for those cameras to work. I think that the guy's very accurate about what's probably happening there. Next question.
Our next question comes from panelist Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC. Are there any compromises with variable ND filters versus separate fixed filters? I've heard there are, but no reasoning was given to back that technical claim.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, with regular ND filters, you're just dealing with attenuating the light. On a variable ND, you're generally working with rotating polarizers. You're stacking these polarizers, so you have a vignetting possible problem. You also have to be very, very aware of where your rear polarizer is sitting, because you're also attenuating and taking out those reflections, which you may or may not want in your picture.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Tom covered it pretty carefully. Yeah, it's usually 2 rotating polarizing filters to adjust the ND. And remember, polarizing filters, almost all LCD monitors employ polarizing filters. So a lot of times if you're using something like that and you're shooting a TV or a monitor, it may just show up black, depending upon the angle of that back polarizer setting. So if you're going to be shooting that, and as Tom mentioned, reflections are attenuated, which makes skin look a little more saturated and different, kind of creepy looking.
Not necessarily better.
Not necessarily better, yes.
Go ahead, Bill.
There is one thing that fixed filters can do that I have never found a filter that affixes to the lens be able to do. And that is, you'll see in cinematography, they're using matte boxes, and these allow you to drop in a filter. One of the great uses for that system, let's say you're shooting a scenic in a forest and there's a lake and there's a bright sky, to get a graduated filter that darkens the top part of the frame and doesn't affect the bottom part of the frame at all is a great way to control a split exposure like that. And those kind of graduated rotating filters like the polarizers just don't let you do that. You have to establish one exposure for the entire scene. It has to be consistent. And then as you drop it down, your aperture opens up, your depth of field gets shallow. So they're just different tools.
And you can actually get graduated filters that are attached to the lens. The big thing that you get with a matte box is really speed. So if you work with someone who has a matte box, who's shooting with a matte box, their ability to swap those filters out in a production. And you have to remember that when you're in production, especially a larger production, and you're paying everybody, it's not like a bunch of friends getting together. Time matters, and so and a lot of times, people can tell you, a good producer can often tell you how much it's cost them per minute for them to sit there, because they've got this data kind of running through, and they're looking at it going, if it takes me 15 minutes to do that across the entire staff, if we delayed it by 15 minutes, people standing around might cost thousands of dollars, more than the camera, to be sitting there waiting for it. And so when it comes down to speed, you start to see those things. So you just, and when I see someone like my brother or Brent By or other people, swapping through mats on a matte box, I realize, that I'm still playing in a little place where I put things on the lens. so it's, it's like I'm still my version is still a little hobby. And so that's the thing to think about there. But if you're not doing that, you can put a lot of these things onto the lens itself. A quick reminder that you can always ask questions throughout the hour. One thing to remember is that we may push the questions back throughout the hour at the end of the first hour for the next day. The good news is you can just put them right back in early in the morning or late tonight, and you can actually have they'll start up in the morning. We're reviewing them now. The most popular ones anyway. We're reviewing between 6 and 6:30 each morning as a panel. So get those questions in, but you can ask questions now, and we probably have a little room for a couple more by the end of the hour. Let's go ahead to the next question.
Our next question comes from Andy Korkendorfer in Vieira, Florida, who asks, why do anamorphic aspects seem more appealing, and which anamorphic aspect is the most common?
I don't know if, I think, go ahead, Bill, I'll let you jump in.
Well, that anamorphic process, which is basically using a particular kind of a lens to squeeze the picture, usually horizontally, into a smaller frame, knowing that in the post process, you're going to expand that out so that everybody who in that squeezed picture looked too thin and too narrow becomes natural looking. There's a lot of advantages to that, and a lot of films are shot anamorphically with anamorphic lens and de-squeezed in post, but it adds a big part of the production process. So it's pretty highly technical as to why cinematographers just choose to go in that direction. It has to do with the hardware costs and the amount of budget they have in post-production. I think that standard squeeze of taking a 16:9 frame, putting it into a smaller sensor size, maximizing the number of pixels on the sensor, and then squeezing it back out to get pixels that actually, to get kind of pixels filled that weren't there before, is a long-standing tradition. I don't think anybody's going to stop doing it, but it's just something you have to understand.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Also, if you've got bokeh, your bokeh looks different between the two. So if you've got out of focus, like little fairy lights or something in the background, they'll, rather than being round circles, they'll be little oblong things. So that's the difference in anamorphic. The bokeh looks different between the two. That's one reason people like it versus something else. And it does conserve more, it gives you, I guess it conserves your film stock if you're shooting on film, or your data if you're shooting on data, digital.
Kind of. Kind of. I mean, we were constrained by the resolution or what we were doing. And it really is a pretty limiting thing. I wouldn't, given how many people now watch things on TV, 16:9 is becoming more and more something. The older filmmakers or folks that went to film school are using anamorphic, because it's kind of the slacker approach. I don't know if it's slacker, but kind of the cool kids approach of doing something. But I think that more and more we're seeing productions done at 16:9, and the reason is because 90% of what people are watching now is on their TV, and what you're doing is creating a letterbox on their TV, which a lot of people don't appreciate. so the, especially if they're, it's one thing when you're pushing it out to a film. It's another thing when you're pushing it to someone's monitor that has because now the new limit is not the film screen, it's the home screen. And as a result, unless you're working on a very large film that is going to have a large theatrical release, anamorphic is probably not a great idea, in my opinion. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it depends on the sensor in your camera. If you've got a full frame sensor, which we spoke of earlier, you're utilizing more of those sensor points on the sensor if you use anamorphic. Otherwise, you're cropping it to get to 16:9 or any other horizontal. Even if you have no letterbox, 16:9 for 1080p or it's 4K transmission. So you're using more of the sensors on the actual sensor.
Yeah, I think it's a dying art. Like, I just be clear, I don't think that, YouTubers don't really do very much of it unless they went to film school or they aspire to be in filmmaking or anything else. It's part of the kind of the mythos of Hollywood, but in 10 years we'll barely ever see it. Next question.
Our next question comes from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. I heard some guy talking about Jump Desktop, which may be yet another remote desktop like Remote PC or Team Viewer. What are the pros and cons of Jump Desktop versus these others? And there is a link.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it was written from the ground up. So whereas Apple Remote Desktop's older, and it was written, we've been using that for like 20 years. So it's it's old. And 60 frames per second, so there is a setting to go 30, but you can also go 60. So it's fast. Like when I snap, so this is it. When I snap, like you can see that's NDI monitor. That's running through a PC. So this is a jump desktop connected machine, and I'm able to move it around. And I mean, the other thing is that it's got an iPad connection, so I can do the same with my iPad. It is another cost. The other thing is that sound works. So whereas try Apple Remote Desktop and try getting audio through, and then there is accurate color, and check out the tearing on an Apple Remote Desktop. It's not full frame, it's not full rate, and with the Retina checkbox, you can also get full. I don't know if it's pixel for pixel, but it's tack sharp when I check that button. So those are some of the reasons why I use.
Next question.
Our next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. I did some more testing with a 14-inch MacBook Pro, and it was surprisingly functional when I rethought my workflow, like using F3 to reach mission control versus swiping up. Have any panelists have had positive experiences in the field with smaller MBPs?
I guess I don't know how many people have the 14-inch or the smaller one, or how many people have positive experiences with it. I know I don't. Go ahead, Guy.
I like it just because it's been with me. So the thing is, the 16, which I have, I don't carry it with me all the time because it's so big. So I typically will my daily carry is an iPad Pro, the 12.9. Yep. But I also have the smaller MacBook, and it's an older one, but I carry it with me just because sometimes I need a full-blown computer, and I have the older one, so it's Intel, so I can actually flip it into becoming a PC. So it's nice to have that option to be able to, multi-purpose a full-blown machine and have it with you. So my my iPad acts as a hotspot, and then I'm able to connect the MacBook Pro to that. So having it with you is a big deal versus 16. I know a lot of people that just don't carry around their big computer anymore. They want to carry around their iPad or something small.
Yeah, I find that the 14 has made me want to carry around my iPad more. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and this is why netbooks never really survived. But I don't know, smaller hands are perfect. So if you have kids that need something like that, or you need a secondary computer that's running around, having a 14-inch rather than a big one, big MacBook in your bag is always a great thing, because I can always connect up to it. We talked about earlier about how to connect up different ways, and then you can run it, and you don't even need it. Things like Duet for your iPad. Then you have a touch screen on the MacBook, and there's different ways to really approach that. So I would definitely have that as a secondary computer if I'm doing a lot of traveling.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the one advantage of the 14-inch that I do have, but I just don't use very often, is that I can open it in economy. so I can actually open it up in economy on a flight or whatever, and it's not too much of a problem. So that's an advantage. But I think it's partially because I'm used to a full-size keyboard, and so I keep on miskeying everything all the time. And then my eyesight isn't what it used to be, so I end up with a very low resolution, and I just feel like I'm just in a box, like I'm just in a little box like this all the time when I'm using it. So it's to Guy's point. It's a full-blown computer. I can open Photoshop in it. That's the number one thing I need to be able to open Photoshop, or I need to be able to do something a little faster in Keynote on a Mac. So I use it for that, but it has basically persuaded me not to carry around a laptop as much as I used to. And I lived on a laptop for 10 years or 20 years. For 20 years, all I had was a laptop. It was my primary thing. It was a 15-inch laptop, and when I shifted down, it just stopped being fun. Next question.
Our next question comes back from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. If you have a quad monitor in one location using 2 Mac HDMI inputs and 2 Windows HDMI inputs, can you remote into it with another quad monitor in another location and have the controls all be the same and have the same experience?
Good, Courtney.
Easily, I'll tell you. Most of those quad monitors just have HDMI inputs, and they don't really have a composite quad output on them. They just appear on the monitor itself. So to remotely get that output of that quad split, you'd have to go into a multi-view and then into a conventional monitor, and then send that multi-view somehow over IP. Or I don't know how far away your other desktop that you want to control this or see this from is going to be. Is it going to be in the same building on the same local area network, or is it going to be out on the internet somewhere? So it's a fairly complex thing to do to control those 4 computers remotely, unless you want to use a KVM like we mentioned before that has an IP interface on it, so that you can send the KVM signals over the internet or over IP V6 or V4 in your local area network.
Next question.
Our next question comes from panelist Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC. I have a new Cameron lens. I put a black and white 3-stop ND filter on it so I could open the aperture up fully at f1.4 without overexposing. With respect to skin color quality, what do you think?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I replaced my Panasonic point-and-shoot. I'm staying in the Panasonic family, so I got a Lumix G7 with a 7 Artisans 35mm f1.4. I found if I open it up fully without any kind of ND filter, it was just because I have such good studio lighting, it was just way overexposed. So I put the ND filter on there, and this is what I got.
Sorry, I think it looks good. I think that oftentimes the challenge with, I'm just trying to really get you up full screen here. Yeah, I think it looks nice. The challenge is always that everything is a little softer when you're while it looks sharper, it's a little softer when you're all the way opened on almost any lens, except for really, really expensive lenses. You'll notice that a little bit, that you're just a touch softer than you were before, even on the subject. Now it looks more like you're more in focus because of of that connection, but that's the thing to pay attention to. But overall, I think it looks great. And it does allow you to open it all the way up. But I would usually recommend not opening quite up to as far as the lens will go, is give it, you'll find that you get overall sharpness is a little bit better elsewhere. All right. And I think that was go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
I was just going to note, in a shot like yours where there is some sort of textural content, now I understand that's just an on and recording or something like that, using that incredibly shallow depth of field and getting that much blur in the background and bokeh, for a minute when I see that scene, I get distracted because I'm trying to say, well, now what does that sign say? I can see something, there's something, and I'm out of the show just while I'm trying to read something. So I tend never to go to that extreme blurred background if there's anything in there that the audience will struggle to read. That's just one of my individual rules.
Yeah, and go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and you said 3 stops, and I'm not sure that's 3 stops you've got in there, but it looks good. Remember, an ND3 is 1 stop, ND6 is 2 stops, ND9 is 3 stops. So if you've got an ND9 filter in there, it is 3 stops. So a lot of people are confused about that.
And I think we're at the end, or we're getting ready to switch over. Quick, just as a note, there is some of us are tracking an event that's coming up, and since we have a moment to talk about it, this is this event here. This is the Generative AI meetup that's happening during GDC, and this is going to be with it's going to be at Fort Mason, and so there's a couple people putting that together. And one of the things to note is that we're probably going to cover it. So we're going to, as office hours, if you are in the Bay Area and you want to be part of it, we're just, I couldn't get in. So my response to not getting in is, hey, have you ever thought about streaming it? So I can get in, and so that we could get in. And I felt like, there wasn't any plan to stream it. And I felt like, I want to see it. I bet you there's a bunch of people in office hours that wants to see it. I bet you there's a bunch of people in the world that want to see it. And so I'm going to be starting to put together a team to do the streaming. I've talked to the folks at scenario.gg they're the ones that are kind of helping move forward, which by the way is a really interesting version of the generative AI. And so there's going to be a bunch of cool things that they're planning. They've got a lot of, I think it's going to be, it could be one of those meetings. Every once in a while, I'm pretty good at like sniffing something that looks like, oh, this is going to be cool. Like this is going to be something that's interesting. I think there might be a lot of interesting people there. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting discussions. And so anyway, we're putting together and we're kind of working that out. So just letting you know that they're probably going to do an announcement, but we're just talking about it a little bit. If you're interested, again, just contact me on Discord. We'll probably put up a sign up sooner than later. If we have some of the tools, which we'll talk about for NAB, available, we're going to use some of those tools there as another test. So it helps us kind of do some early testing of some of the stuff that we're working on. So there's not much of a connection with the group other than the fact that I wanted to go, I couldn't go, and then I figured that a lot of us would want to go too. So we're trying to figure out how do we make it available to more people.
Alex, can you put those dates back up again? I wanted to check.
It's the 21st. It's 4 p.m. on the 21st of March.
Okay.
So it's coming right up. It's just in a couple of weeks. Ping me on Discord if you're interested in being part of the local team that's going to kind of put that together. It's going to be scrappy. There'll be 4 or 5 of us putting it together.
I love that.
We're not charging anything for it, so it's just there's no budget. We're just kind of figuring it out. Like, let's just figure out how we can do it. This goes back to my old days of covering events that I wanted to cover just because I wanted to, and so a bunch of us will probably show up there on the day and put it together. But we are working on making sure we have good wired internet and stuff like that. So
I suspect we'll do Scrappy really well.
We're pretty used to that. I think our version of Scrappy might be better than most people's version of Scrappy, but it isn't going to be a big truck or big thing. It's going to be like a little extreme and a couple cameras and possibly a LiveU and that type of thing. So stay tuned and we'll have more information over the next couple days and weeks. Next question.
Our next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Thank you for the help yesterday. My options are the analog Y into a composite input or an SDI to HDMI with loop through into the HDMI input. Is there a reason you would choose one over the other? Camera resolution is 720p.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, for 720p, I'd probably use the SDI input because remember, analog video is 480, so you're not going to get full resolution going into a composite video in a Y. So I would use the 720p, go to SDI to HDMI and split.
There you go. All right, we are changing subjects to our second hour. And we're talking about NAB and how we're going to cover it. We are getting closer. And again, this is there's in the email that goes out, and I'll send out one more alert. We've been accumulating a lot of folks, and we're meeting on Mondays. So if you're part of that group that's there, we're meeting on Mondays at I think 11 o'clock in the morning or something like that to talk about it. And we really needed to figure out exactly how many people are coming. We've been pulling together some technical stuff. I don't have all the details yet, but it does look like we'll have at least one LiveU that we'll be able to use and potentially more. And we're still working out what that LiveU is, whether it's a 600 or 800, but we are kind of working that out. So we have that there. We now have, we're going to be reaching out to everybody who signed up to find out, are they really coming and are they really available? But there is right now, starting to approach 50 people that are ready to be involved in some way, shape, or form. So I think that sign up again is going out on the emails, and we're going to start putting that together. So that's what we're kind of working on right now. And if panelists have anything they want to comment on, just go ahead and throw it into raise your hand in this question. And if you have questions, again, about NAB or suggestions, it doesn't have to just be questions, but suggestions of things you want to see. I mean, this is us telling you where we're going, as well as listening to all of you of what you want to see. So one of the things that we are looking at is, kind of a wider scale of what we're doing. So to cover as much of the event, I think that we're going to try to bounce around a lot. Now, depending on how many wireless transports we have, it'll drive a little bit about how we cover things. But we are looking at possibly some coverage on Sunday, and this will be probably less formal of Sunday. And then we are looking at windows of 2 or 3, as much as 6 hours, but probably 2 or 3 hours of coverage on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So these will be, we'll come on, and typically we're going to come on. The big thing with NAB is it's so big. So what we're looking at is on Monday we'll come out of one hall, and Tuesday we'll come out of another hall, and Wednesday we'll come out of another hall. And if we have 2, then we'll start bouncing back and forth between halls to kind of cover things live that are there. One of the things that I am looking at doing is experimenting heavily with shorts, so YouTube shorts. You'll probably see some stuff that's not heavily produced, but very high volume of things that some of us find interesting to it. I'm not gonna Depending on how many people are available in different days for post-production, we may send some of those to post for adding things like captions and text and some other details or other things to them. But probably half of them or more will just be capture on the phone as a single take, head and tail it, put it up, so that we can cover as many things as we can. I think that we are definitely going to go for, we're definitely going to try to maintain a high quality of footage, but also very much lean into volume, because there's just so much to see, at NAB, and we want to make sure that you're getting you're dabbling through all of those things. I think that we're going to have enough room for 2 teams if we have the transports to do that. So if we've got the LiveUs to do it, I think we can have 2 teams roaming on site. I think we're going to have 10 or 15 folks that are available on site, so we should be able to do 2 teams there. Sunday, as I said, will probably be informal. If we do something, it'll be mostly to kick the tires and make sure everything's working, and we'll wander around a little bit. It won't be something as focused as those other days. We are looking for panelists that want to sit during that time and team members that want to run the back end on that time. And if you're interested in being part of that show, what we would recommend is we are going to use the standard architecture of office hours for it. So we're not doing any special pipeline other than the big thing that we're trying to figure out is we want to be able to cover it in 5.1 and HDR. So we're working through a bunch of challenges over the next month of how do we deliver to YouTube a HDR feed and 5.1 and still be able to kind of cut back and forth between that feed and what we're doing. And I've got some ideas on how to do that. Some of them are prettier than others. so we're going to be working on that over the next month to try to establish what that might look like. It could mean a downstream switcher that is doing the final output for YouTube, so that we can basically switch between our panel and that. And the panel would, so those are routes that we're going to be talking about a lot over the next couple of weeks to figure that out. But anyway, so that's that's what we're kind of working on here. We are going to have plenty of room for it. What we're going to look at is for any VOD stuff, they will go to YouTube. They will not go into the live show. The live show is going to be live. So it's going to be a very live show. So there'll be almost no playback. There may be B-roll and stills. So we are going to look for teams to do B-roll and stills that the panelists can talk over. What we want to do is really maximize when we're live. The panelists have some video that they can show or talk to, and we'll have previews for them. They'll have stills of things that are coming up, and they can talk about the things that were released. But we're going to probably, and then we'll cut to live feeds. Some of my there'll be a lot of different people. A couple people hosting. We're kind of figuring that out right now. I'll host some of the time. Admittedly, my time frames are a little bit constrained because I'm speaking more at NAB than I expected. So I've got a couple conflicts there that we're going to figure out. But I'll be covering some of those things as well. And that may also mean that we have some informal LiveU hits that come out that are more. Like they may come out in the afternoon, and what we may be doing is just punching into using, we want to do some panel stuff, but we have to find out what the availability is of the panel. There may be some coverage that is pure LiveU to YouTube inside of Mocana in a much lighter team to manage it. And that has a lot to do with who's available at different times of the day and what we actually use. So we want to have some period of time that is available to the panelists if they want to be part of that larger connection. And the amount of time will depend on how many panelists are available when. But there may be other times that we're streaming, and those times that we're streaming will be a more direct, just YouTube, straight to YouTube. And then we have all we need at that point are volunteers to read the questions or deliver those questions back to the host, whether that's me or somebody else. And there'll be less infrastructure to do that. So we want to kind of experiment with that as well. That's how we've done it every other year. So I'm not very afraid. I'm less afraid of that than I am of trying to integrate it with the panel. We really want that because I think it adds a lot of value to it. But I'm mostly used to direct feed and taking questions. And so we'll probably in different time frames we'll do that. We also want to make sure that It's available later in the afternoon, so there may be some like late afternoon shots, so that folks in Asia and Australia and so on and so forth can see a live feed and be part of that as well. So, and there's so much to cover that we could cover. Eventually our goal is to cover it, start broadcasting at 8 a.m., stop at 8 p.m., and just be covering covering stuff all the time. We're not going to do that this year, but we are going to be pretty aggressive at covering as much as we can throughout the day to just experiment. Again, we're continuing to experiment, and this is going to be a new version of what we're doing there. Let's go ahead and do the first question.
Our first question is from Brian Shand in Sydney, Australia. What advice would panelists on previous OH productions give to the planning of future shows?
Go ahead, Bill.
I think it's the same discussion we have here a lot. I mean, really, office hours more than anything else is about building community. So if you're interested in building a show for the future, for what we kind of do, I think the first thing to do is identify the community you're interested in addressing. The second part of that is then how can you use this system to serve that community? It's understanding what they want. I think it's a bit of a problem if you're coming and say, I just want to make some money and I want to do a show and put it out on the air. We're here as a service organization as much as anything. And I think that's what it draws people to keep coming back to office hours. Most of us, we're not really here to make our living doing this. We're here to take expertise that we've spent a lot of time developing over the course of our careers and turn it around and give some of it back. So as long as you have that orientation and can identify an audience and you want to build an audience, that's been my orientation from day one here, and I think it holds pretty firm.
You go, Jeffrey.
So, and it really depends on if you're talking on the floor, if you're talking in the back panel, but just got to remember, you got to roll with the flow. Because things happen, and like for instance, we might not be able to get a signal across. We might get choppy signal or anything like that because it's all going to be wireless. We might have something roll through a shot as we're doing an interview. Just all these little things that it's so unpredictable that you just have to be ready to accept it and catch a couple falling cameras if you need to.
Yeah, I do think that if we're able to get the LiveU set up, my experience has been that the coverage, and it may change, this may go right back to what Jeffrey's talking about. You don't know what you don't know until it happens. Generally, our coverage has been pretty good, except for the very center of the central hall. So I've used LiveUs quite a few times, and so right where the Panasonic booth used to be, I don't know if it's still going to be there or not, but that area where there's a eatery like down below, and then there's so much concrete and rebar there that we find that it's like a black hole. And right there, but outside of that, we find that almost every other part of it we've been able to cover pretty effectively with LiveUs, specifically, and so that's why we're kind of leaning towards those to make that happen. And so I think that's what we're kind of leaning into. I think that again, this is going to feel a little different than the ones in the past in the sense that it's going to be a little bit more of what we would call slow content, which we're going to allow it to kind of evolve, and for people to kind of bring it, take it all in. But we are going to look for opportunities for where we can extend what we're doing to, a variety of things. Like there's a couple crazy things we may try to do, which is multicam into the LiveU, but at 4K, which may not sound possible, but it is. It's mostly being able to switch on the fly locally, and there's some ways that we can do that we've used in the past with TerraDecks and so on and so forth that we may experiment with, but that might be like the last day. Like we're going to fiddle with this and see how this goes. So you may see us do something more formal during the for an hour or two or three in the mornings, and again it doesn't open until 10, so we're probably not going to go live until 10 in the morning. So there'll be a break between office hours and when this coverage actually happens. And again, we're going to organize who's available for it. If not enough people are available to run the back end of office hours for those days, then those will be direct feeds. And that means that we just need somebody to read, move the questions around, and we'll stream straight out of those cameras. And that's a doable solution for us. In some ways, an easier solution on a lot of levels, but it will be a better show with more panelists. So we want to incorporate the panelists into the time that they're available. I think that we are going to make sure that the panelists have other news and other things they could talk about. If we break up, the idea is that someone goes, well, let's take a look at some of the other announcements, and then we'll, move that into that process. So those are some of the things we're going to kind of work on there. And again, this is kind of a step in one direction there. And so we'll see how it works. Next question.
Our next question comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. How will Signal be acquired for NAB? How do you ensure consistent connectivity in such an environment?
It's hard to ensure it. We don't have the budget right now to get a hard line there. We have done it in the past where we've had as much as the switch there, where we have an internet connection and video and everything else right out of it for other projects that we've worked on. And so that's been something we've used in the past. We are going to. One of the things we want to do is try to do contribution from lots of different sources. So using possibly Zoom as a source, Stream Voodoo as a source, LiveUs are going to be the backbone of what we're doing most likely. We'll know that next week. But we don't have a lot of hard lines there to make that work. So those are the kind of things that we're going to kind of work around. Again, we look at this as iterations. We want to improve on what we learned at NAB last year and all of the things that we did last year, and then continue to see what we like and don't like. And then IBC will be the next. We'll have lots of ones in between, or we potentially have lots of things to cover in between, but IBC is the next big one, and then NAB again. So we're kind of tick-tocking through that process. Go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry. If you said earlier you were planning on trying to stream in 5.1 and HDR, how are you going to handle the mixing in stereo in the field for the 5.1? Are you going to do that?
We're working on that. So I'm doing some testing. So we believe that the Scorpio will affect. I'm going to be doing some testing this weekend with this. We believe that the Scorpio will allow us to basically unwrap the Ambio mic, and if not, we'll have another mic system that's there. But in the Scorpio, we can actually build a pretty complex mix where we basically take the theory at the moment is to take the interview mic and run that right down the center channel, and then use the other mics as a soft ambient, a solid 20 dB below, at least 20 dB below the interview mic. We don't want to make it a distraction. But we think that we're going to be the goal in this process of 5.1 is not so much that you're going to hear music going or back and forth or whatever. What we found is that if you stimulate the brain from different directions using those different speakers, what happens is that it creates a space. When you hear something back here, your brain becomes conscious to it, and it starts to become conscious to all the areas around it. And what happens when it starts to expand that, it actually makes the person sitting in the center channel more present. They feel like they're more there. It's almost like creating a audio 3D because you're doing that, because not everything's coming as a mush from the stereo speakers. So we're going to experiment with it. It may work. We may retreat to say, hey, we can't do this. It's not working. And that's totally acceptable. But we are going to, as soon as we have, I'm going to be doing some captures this weekend. I'm just going out, so I'm taking stuff with me. I'll like wander around just to capture some stuff so we can kind of play with that idea. But we're going to start playing with the idea of using that to create the atmosphere like you're at the event. And then we can mix it back down, but we can do that all inside of a Scorpio. It's something that's doable.
Well, you might also, during your testing, look at how it sounds when it's all flattened down to mono. So if people are listening on phones or anything that doesn't support surround sound or stereo, if it flattens down, if it's still intelligible, or if it muddies the sound too much.
Yeah, 100%. The YouTube, we're streaming to YouTube for this, and it does a fold down. So we'll be testing all of those things. Like you're 100% right. We have to figure that out. The other option for us, by the way, is to not try to do anything in the field and just to send, our mic mix, send the 5 channels from the surround out, send the mic mix back as a separate channel, and do all the mixing back at the office as well. So there's a couple different ways for us to handle that. We get 16 channels of audio from the LiveUs that we're looking at, and so. If we get those, if we don't get those, then we're not going to try this. so we'll see. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So getting back to that questions, last year we had 52. There were 52,000 people that attended NAB, and for what we did with the Mr. Net system, we had a pretty successful thing. Even though we were going through Zoom rather than doing what we're going to be doing with the LiveUs this year, and of course the 1080 versus 4K. Usually what happens in these events is a company like AT&T will come in and they'll throw a whole bunch of repeaters throughout the whole hall. It helps a little bit, but not as much as you think, especially if it's a 20% boost like they're expecting from last year, so that would be about 70,000 people or more, then you might have a lot of competition, especially if everybody's trying to do the exact same thing that we're doing.
Okay, Bill.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I'm actually kind of hopeful about Wi-Fi coverage and things like that, only because they built the West Hall last year, and I would imagine that the budgets for that were so big and that a good chunk of it was put into that infrastructure. I'm hoping that whether by laying fiber optic or something, they've extended some of the new infrastructure from West Hall back into Central and the other halls so that maybe there's better Wi-Fi coverage than there has been traditionally. In the old days when NAB was 160,000 people, Wi-Fi coverage was an absolute total disaster. But
Yeah.
maybe it's better now. We're going to keep my fingers crossed.
Well, and our goal is to do, again, the feedback that we got was very good from folks that were looking at NAB last year, and we want to keep on improving that trajectory. I think that if we have a good year in that process, I think that we're going to, what the goal down the road is that we have wired connections to all the halls. That those are coming back to us, to a central place where we have a studio, and that we're using, more of just standard wireless, that's there, so, wireless, cameras and so on and so forth to make that work. Our goal is to ramp that up a little bit. And this year will help us kind of make that case for next year to do that. But I think that the connectivity I feel like it'll be okay. We will definitely see some breakup here and there. Again, that's why on Sunday, we're probably going to try to gather a lot of B-roll and a lot of images that the panel can use if for any reason we need to find a better space with one or more of the LiveUs. Next question.
Our next question is from Paul Buchan in Columbus, Ohio. Is there anything that people attending the show but unable to assist during production can do to help? Upload pictures, submit must-see tips from the floor, contribute to an evening beverage fund?
Okay.
That last one, let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that last one. That one's really important. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, here's my PayPal address. I'm kidding. So I can't speak for office hours, of course, because 503C, however donations work on that. But it wouldn't be a bad idea if there was a thing like a Uber fund or anything like that people can contribute to. Other than that, hopefully we're going to get some graphics and things ready to send out, just basically help promote to your channels that we're doing this so we can get more people coming in to see what all the hubbub is about.
Yeah, the biggest thing that you can do if you're going to be at the site is to take pictures and point us towards things that you think are cool. So we will definitely probably will be pretty basic, like a channel inside of Discord for people who are there who can't be part of the production to try to point us towards it and take the thing that would be really good. And we'll work on seeing if there's some way that we can do that. If you're interested in being, kind of a field researcher, definitely go up and sign up for being a volunteer for NAB. That's enough. And so if you do that, we can organize those of you who are doing that and potentially give you, for instance, a link that you can upload, a Frame.io link or something else that you can actually put stuff up onto our server so that we can very quickly go through those things. And that's something that's quite possible on our end. So take a look at that. And see what you can make happen there. So because I think it would be great to get video from folks as well as stills. And when you do video, a lot of times what we want is going to be 16:9 and fairly still. Like just look at stuff and then move with your waist. So things that aren't going like this as you're looking at things, because we don't know how we'll use it, but having B-roll of it, doing description. So we'll think about ways that you can report on things that you find interesting, so that we can take a look at it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex said most of what I was going to say. Yeah, it's a big show, and even with 50 people, I don't know how well they're going to be spread out, if they're going to be able to cover all the nooks and crannies. And sometimes you find some really interesting things in those little 10 by 10 booths that are tucked away in the sands or in some other hall somewhere. So if you're finding those things, a good central point, like Alex was mentioning, for those people that are there and in the field to upload things to, and maybe on the last day of the show or something, or if we're doing coverage for more than one day, is to just collect all those little things that may not have warranted a full live interview during the show, but then can just be additional stuff we found at NAB, a little show that collects all those together into one spot. Absolutely.
And I think that this is where the panel could be really interesting, as far as, throwing those things up like, hey, this is what Paul found over here. And this is what, so if we can find a way that people can kind of put it up there and also let us know it's there, then we can start to have people can be throwing things out as to, like, Paul I thought this was great. And it can be a connection of those things. We can even set up, this is where folks in the post can help, where if we have a bunch of images, we can even just have montages that we play for a couple minutes during the live show. That's the one thing that might be really good. It's just a couple little things that are there, and it could still be potentially something that happens underneath folks talking. Like, oh, this is really cool. Oh, that's like, I want to try to keep it as live as we can in that process. But that could be a fun thing to look at. But we can do, the only place we might do is some of those montages could be a lot of fun, especially at the end of an hour or at the end of something that we want to take a break for a moment and let everybody reset. That'd be great. Next question.
Brian Shand is back from Sydney, Australia. How will comms be handled between the field team, backend, and panelists?
Right now, we're still planning to use Unity for those things. We are in discussion with ClearComm about putting in using an Eclipse server to upgrade not only NAB but what we do in the future. So we're kind of in that. We're kind of researching that right now. But at the moment, it would be Unity to connect everybody up for that process. So that's still going to stay the same as far as how we get back and forth with folks. I do want to try to figure out, there is a return channel, which I'm told sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, but I've had a lot of success with the return channel to the LiveUs. And so if we do get those in and we have the servers in our office, we will, there's, as long as what we found is that the LiveU returns don't work very well unless you use the analog, what used to be the analog inputs. That's what I have to figure out. Analog inputs worked great for the older servers, and I'm told that the newer servers may or may not have those. And so we'll figure out, but we'll be doing some testing, assuming we get those servers early, to figure out what we can, how hard we can push that. Next question.
Our next question comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. How do you plan to get permission to bring gear onto the trade floor? We snuck into CineGear, and George had contacts at NAMM, which is the National Association of Music Merchants show, but NAB may be a bigger ask.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
In years past, you definitely needed to have a press badge to do anything on floor for recording. Now, I always come as press, so I do have that caveat there. So I think we should be covered on that. But there's been a lot of rules have been relaxed especially since COVID, so they can get the information out there. And I have not seen any regulations or rules saying that you can or cannot do this as of yet.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I went on a press pass for about 15 years to NAB, and I've noticed that the last couple of times I was there, they understood that more people were coming in with more things. In the old days, the press team would all congregate in the press room, and there's a press room at NAB that has bigger connectivity and stuff like that. It's usually pretty crowded. The only real advantage of it is they serve you a free lunch there, so that's very important. That's why you'd see all your friends from years past at that one point of contact at NAB. But past that, I think it's going to be, since everybody has phones and a lot of people are going to be trying to do this, a little more diffuse and a little easier. They want to rebuild NAB to those glory days when it was 160,000 people, if they possibly can, because it drove a lot of eyeballs to the product, and that's what they're there for.
Good, Courtney.
They may have changed it since I was an exhibitor in NAB because it's been a number of years, but it used to be you would have to secure, if you're bringing broadcast equipment on and off the floor and you're not there on a press badge, used to have to obtain equipment passes from NAB so that you bring it on, and when you bring it off, you have to show them their equipment pass that that particular piece of equipment was brought onto the floor. That's to prevent people from, at show closing time to picking up stuff out of the booths and walking out with it. So they have to ensure that there's not a lot of theft, and there is a lot of theft at NAB of equipment that's on display. So they used to control that pretty tightly. Whether they still do or not, I couldn't tell you.
The biggest reason to get the press pass, in my opinion, is the press room. Is so that you can get into the press room and get coffee and have a quiet place to sit. I mean, a lot of times at NAB, it's just hard to find somewhere to sit down and work on something. And so, the press pass has been useful. I've covered NAB probably 20 times over the last, and I've been to NAB almost 30 times. And I've used a press pass for my gear once. I'm not that worried about it. A lot of times I just walk in and start shooting. Very rarely do we see a lot of control over that. But we are going to go through the process of getting at least whoever, once we know how many kits we're going through, we'll go through the process of making sure that they're registered and that NAB knows it's coming. Next question.
Our next question comes from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Alberta. At IBC last year, giving earpieces to the booth worked pretty good. Is that planned for this event coverage?
Good, Bill.
I don't know what the plans are, but communication is everything in these kind of circumstances. And having been fortunate enough to be able to host or co-host some of the things that we have done, that ability to coordinate things in the background is often what elevates a show from being okay to truly professional. Communication really is the core of an effort that has to coordinate lots of people like this.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I think this had to do with the ability of the panelists to ask the person being interviewed some direct questions so that they could hear those questions directly on a crowded show floor, and that was really helpful. So if we could get that going again, that would be really great. So we could get some interactivity between the panelists sitting at home and the show floor hosts.
Yeah, so we're probably going to experiment with a couple things. What I really want to work is a speaker, that people can just, so that they don't have to do anything, a speaker that's kind of mounted under that. We've done this. I've done this in the past where we mount speakers underneath the camera. So, so that it just comes right out as you're talking to them there. There are some, obviously we're going to look at some echo cancellation issues that could occur there. The other way to make that work is to use IFBs. And what I've done in the past, and we have to go through a lot of them, is that we get a standard IFB kit, and then we have a standard IFB transmitter. And then what we do is the earpieces are just disposables. Like we just use them once. so just the ear part, so you can get 100 of them at a time. Sometimes we try to clean them, but oftentimes when we're going through so many, we'll get 200 of those earpieces. We'll swap the earpiece out on every person and just let them stick it into their ear. And then they'll have an IFB that they can be part of there. So it depends on how we're doing the interviews, but I think that may be the way we kind of approach that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I like the idea of giving the guest a gift, but what about the?
Well, it's not a gift. It's just a little earpiece. It's like the rubber piece that goes into your ear.
It's still a gift.
Sure.
The sticker's a gift. So
what about? Is it a gift?
What about bone conduction? We could get some cheap bone conduction headsets. Those are easily cleanable.
It's just easier to the hard part in a loud environment is I don't find that the bone conduction works as well, and so there'll be a lot of. You have to turn it up so much that it tickles. Like, when you do the bone conduction in a loud environment, it'd be a little harder. The nice thing about the earpieces is they block out everything out of one ear and then you can hear it. And it's just I think a lot easier for us to put them on. I think it will look nicer, to be totally clear. So I think that we'll probably do those real quickly. Again, as we have a team, we're going to look at when we can interview folks. A lot of our coverage is not going to be interviews because they slow down the production. And so a lot of it will be people who are there, whether it's whoever the experts are that we have to find here, depending on who's going and who wants to say stuff. People there showing you something and giving you their opinion about why that's important. When we can get somebody that is worth talking to, we're going to try to bring them in, but it'll have to do with the thing that I found over the last 20 years of doing these events is trying to negotiate the right people to talk at the time that I need them, basically slows my production down to a crawl. And so we usually come in saying, hey, we've got, X number of people, we have 200 people watching, and we'd like to come in and interview someone. Do you have someone available, and who that is, and are they technical? And it comes in really, really, we just spool them up. And if they don't, we just move on to the next booth. It's like this wash that just comes by. There's so many fish in the sea, we don't have to focus on any specific ones. There'll be a handful of ones that we're excited about that will take more time to organize. And that's the advantage, again, of if we can get 2 transmission systems that we can go back and forth from, which is what we're working on pretty hard, even if only one of them's HDR and the other one's regular, whatever that looks like. The advantage of all of that is that we can have one that's spending more time on things and one that's moving faster. And so we can kind of do a little mix of both of those kinds of content. Next question.
Our next question comes from Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. By using shorts at NAB, are these vertical or horizontal? Preference. For consistency, this info might help.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There is well, you can definitely say use horizontal or vertical. Of course, if you do a horizontal video, you got to turn it into a vertical video. I did a lot of shorts at CES this year. For me, shorts were always running gun stuff. So, like for instance, I was at the PTZ Optics booth, and if you watch that short that I did, that was 1 minute of me talking, and I did that short I think 3 times, because one time somebody got in the way, the other time I messed up on what I was going to say, but that third time it was just a charm. It was perfect. Then I was able to put in all the post-processing stuff and get it up and running. There are some shorts where I did 2 or 3 different shots, brought it in. The one I did where Paul Abdul was showing off the new glasses, that was actually taken from 2 different phones. It's one vertical, one horizontal, and I did a lot of repositioning of the frame for that. It does, with a horizontal, it does do a little bit more work to try and get it into the frame, but it also gives you a little bit more to work with. So there's a little give and take in doing both.
I think we're going to experiment with both. We're going to deliver them all as vertical. so they're all going to be, shorts are a vertical format. But we are going to, but I think that we are going to potentially do some, again, a lot of this has to do with how many people volunteer offsite and that are available for a lot of these things versus onsite. We know that we have 10 or 15 people that are going to be onsite. And so we'll figure out what we do with those, with folks there. But if we have a lot of people on offsite, we may, send some videos out for them to do additional posts. So for instance, if I just take my iPhone and capture 4K 16:9, I can send that up, I can upload that, and someone can on Lucid Link or on anything else, pull that down, crop it, and then do a pan and scan, for that to get all the information that we want. And we may experiment with some of that, like how effective was that? Again, I'm going to lean more towards volume. So I'm going to shoot a lot of stuff vertical with my phone, talking over it, and we'll post it. And basically what I'll do is we'll post it up there for someone to add more stuff to it if possible. And, but it will have a delivery date. It needs to go out. So I'll be pushing stuff up. It needs to go out at a certain time, regardless of whether there's any post done or not. So like I'm going to send it up head and tail, push it up. In some cases, if I don't think it's important enough, I'm just going to send it straight to the channel. But we're going to post stuff that is, I'd love to have, and if we have enough people that are interested in grabbing onto those things and coordinating amongst themselves and putting those up and adding, I would love to add text. I would love to add, especially like little prices and what it is and a lower third and a thing, like those are great. But what we don't want to do is have the infrastructure of our post-production slow down the output. So it's going to have to go out at a certain pace, no matter what. And then if we can, it's a great opportunity for people to really do that. There's nothing like, if you're at all interested in this, there's nothing like having to do this, with media coming in to get good at what you do. It's just, having large volumes of data coming in, and you just have to grab onto it and put it up, and quickly figure out how to put the graphics on, quickly figure out how to do those things and be part of that production pipeline. It's really powerful. And I think that, that's, it's a great training opportunity, even for If you decide you can only do it on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening or on a Monday evening, those types of things. But we want to just put out an enormous amount of content so people really get the whole feel of the space. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing to remember is that they say a minute on YouTube, but technically it's 59.59. Anything over a minute, and then it just becomes a regular video, which is not it's something we could actually do. If something it has more information to it, it could still be a vertical video and go a minute 5. It'll just show up as a regular video. Plus having something, this is where the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi type dongles that hook up into the phone so you have a microphone on you work the best, because it's so close to the camera when you're doing that type of stuff. You have good audio, because if you try to use the phone camera, sometimes it works, and especially if you've got it pointed away, it doesn't work as well. So those are the things that you have to consider when you do the shorts. And like I said, horizontal and vertical, it's really how much editing you really want to do.
And I'm going to be testing, and I will be going to a couple other. I'm going to test at GDC for an afternoon. Some of the ideas that I have there, because GDC is near my house, so we'll do some streaming from there, and I may stream or jump in or record some shorts that are there, and I'll be testing the best solution that I can imagine, for it. So a headset mic with a with an XLR, into the camera. Or into the iPhone, like how do I make it as high quality an audio as I can make it to cover this stuff? And so I'm kind of working through that kind of coverage. And so we'll be doing a couple tests between now and then to try to figure that out. And we'll continue to error correct, over that week. But I totally agree with Jeffrey. But I'm going to take the heaviest possible, like the best of everything I can imagine, to try to get the highest quality audio and video out to just see what it would take to do that. I don't think we'll be able to do a whole bunch of kits that way, but I'm going to try to do at least one kit that way so that we can figure it out. And then whatever we find works between what Jeffrey's doing, between what I'm doing, what other people are doing, will most likely become standard issue relatively soon after that. Next question.
This is also from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Do we allow the host to change the pre-planned route, kind of like Guy did at CineGear, or do we stay on a pre-planned course? Does the audience enjoy serendipity?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There's always going to be that level of you have to make the change to do that. I love the fact that I can bounce between one another. When we did NAB last year, there was that segment that I did. We were at the booth, Canon's booth, just learned about the N500 camera. I think it was the PTZ camera. And then I walked over and I watched one of the performers, because they have these cool stages where people perform. They got the big cameras. These are cameras that I don't normally get to touch. And I'm just sitting there going like that. And I went back and I said, "Hey, Bram, just hit the record. Let's get it in there, and then I'll talk about how this is part of the NAMM or NAB experience, and go from there." So I like it a little bit looser. However, the day before, when we do the relative walkthrough of the show, at least we'll have some sort of plan. But I try to keep it as loose as possible, because you just never know what's going to happen.
Go ahead, Bill.
Seems to me we've got three buckets we're trying to attempt here. The regular office hours show will be on all of these days. And as Alex noted, the regular NAB show floor doesn't open until 10 a.m. So we'll need stuff and things to talk about with the panel in the morning. That's the regular show. Then there is the NAB coverage, which is the teams out here doing something special on office hours to cover NAB itself as an entity. And then we're talking about these shorts, which are kind of more long tail content that'll come out of the show that focus on individual vendors and things like that. So all three of those things have to happen. In the middle one, we're at the show bringing the show to you. I think everybody adores that serendipity of we're going past, we didn't understand this thing is here, this thing is really cool, we can bring it to you live in real time, and everybody has kind of lit up in all the ones I've been involved with. When you find that special thing, Guy takes a turn to the left and he runs across something that everybody is interested in, and that really makes you feel like you are there, which is the magic of live broadcasting.
Yeah. So, and to put it in perspective, how we're covering it, I mean, NAB is probably the biggest event of the year for us, IBC being a close second. And so we're going to push really hard on this. And so one of the things that I am looking at, it just depends on the volunteering, who's available for panel and who's available to cover. In the mornings, we're going to be covering things. So Monday is going to be the business of the broadcast. So we're going to try to talk about where the business is and see if we can bring a couple guests in to talk about that, but what's happening in broadcast. Tuesday, we'll be talking about, it's graphics day. So we'll be talking about new things we saw at NAB about graphics. Wednesday is new things we saw, interesting things about video of audio. Thursday is video, so we'll talk about new video outlet. But those are not they're not coming in from the show floor. Those are a regular show that is talking about something. And some of us are going to join from NAB. So we'll be talking about the things that we saw, the things that we'll have our own images that we want to show. I'm bringing a pretty complete rig, so to do that. And so we will have things that we want to show in that space. And so a lot of us will be talking about what we saw there. We'll be answering your questions. We'll be talking about, so that's more of what's cool about that is it's kind of a retrospect, on what we so the live part will be this live experience, but each day we'll be talking about what we saw over the previous days related to that subject. And then of course on Friday, we'll talk about the coverage, what worked, what didn't work. The best time to do that is right after. so we're on Friday, we will talk about the experience, talk about what we want to change, talk about, it may be a horrible disaster. And then we'll talk about all the things we don't want to do again. So anyway, so we'll figure all of that stuff out. As far as serendipity, I think that however many hours, and again, this is a volunteer limited thing, how many people are available on the floor, how many people are available to run the show, how many panelists are available. We'll decide anywhere from 1 to probably 3 hours a day that we're doing live coverage at from 10 to 11 or 10 to 1, whatever that is. That will have some serendipity that's going on there. And some, but within limits, we'll kind of be winding through certain locations and so on and so forth. But we will try to figure out those, we can't just go I can promise you, we can't go from the central hall to the north hall or north hall to it'll all be the next thing we cover will be somewhere pretty close to where we were. So you'll have a group of things that are possible. If we take these other live streams out that are going to happen outside of the panel view and outside of the general infrastructure that are straight lives to YouTube, those will probably that's going to be an experiment of a much more serendipitous thing where we've got a LiveU and a camera operator and we're just wandering around, with a wide angle lens, and we're wandering around and looking at things and talking about things. And those are going to be most likely in the afternoons. That will do that, and that's going to be a much more loose thing. It's not going to be part of the panel view or anything else. We may play it into the after hours and let people ask questions that are there to do that, but we'll still be streaming it to YouTube. This is also the backup. If I'm having trouble with HDR, we may go back to SDR for the show, for that coverage, and then there'll be these other things that we're doing that are just I don't have to go through the infrastructure. The hard part is getting the Zoom part to work with the HDR part that's happening, and I've got some ideas on how to do that, but that part is the part that is the most difficult that I'm trying to figure out. Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Alberta is back with this question. Would the shorts be used in the live coverage to allow for walking between booths, or are they going to appear separately to attract attention to the live coverage?
Separately, because they won't look good. They'll be vertical. So, they'll be vertical. We won't put them in. So the shorts, my goal is that we produce between 50 and 100 shorts. That's the kind of, to give you kind of a sense of it. I personally am capable of at least 30 that week. And I've done 30 in a day. So I feel like if I'm there for 4 days straight, I can probably punch 30 of them out. And I do them very fast, on my coverage. And so, but my goal is that there'll be a lot of shorts, that are coming out at a very high volume, and they'll all be seen 8 times. That's fine. We're just trying to figure out what works and doesn't work. Again, some of them will get some post-production treatment. Some of them will not. We'll decide how hard was that? What does it look like? One of the things we have to figure out is the, kind of templates, for, how this is all going to work as far as how these get put down and set up there. So we're going to be discussing that over the next month to really figure out exactly how we want to do that. Generally, if I'm at a booth, my plan is that if I think it's worth covering, I'm going to do a short at the booth and upload it. And then I'm going to turn my camera 90 degrees and shoot a bunch of B-roll, a bunch of images and a bunch of video that the panel can use to discuss things later, but either in the morning session or in the live session later, just so we have the content. And then what I'm looking at is putting up folders either in, we would figure out whether we're using how we're storing that stuff, but at minimum Frame.io, if not LucidLink, where I'm uploading a bunch of stuff, and I'll put it in a folder like here's the short, here's the B-roll, and then we'll have some folders, and then someone can go in and start grabbing those relatively live to do post on them. But the shorts will go out again. The shorts will have a certain time frame that need to go out. I think that most likely on Sunday, almost everything I shoot will go straight to YouTube. I will cut it and put it up so that there's stuff coming out. But by Sunday afternoon, I'll probably slow down a little bit and start sending stuff up for post so that it looks nicer. And we'll go from there. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. But what's more interesting is, and this is something that I don't normally do, is excuse me, we'll have teams there. So where a lot of my shorts are, I just pull out my phone and do that. We'll be able to have somebody else hold the camera while we do something. So that might make the shorts a little bit more interesting. But yeah, definitely want to get them up as quick as possible, and they just don't hit the format of the show in a vertical format. So it's best if they're left out. Yeah,
and the again, I think we'll do some stuff with teams. I'm really happy with just showing my point of view of and I'm pretty. People will decide. They can. One of the things we'll talk about that Friday is what kind of content that we like. You'll find that mine is very ADD, active camera. I'll point at something and then I'll go over here and then I'll go over here and show you something and talk about it and put my finger out and point at something and do something like I just boom, 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 and then I upload it. so because I want to, that's how I look at things. And again, it may or may not, again, those are things that we may look at those shorts as well. And people want to cover that, in more detail over time. The thing that I'm also remembering is we probably won't spend a lot of time doing long interviews at booths, because if we like the product that we see, we're going to invite them to a second hour. I can get them for a whole hour rather than trying to scarf off all the information, so a lot of this is going to be this scatter shot of grabbing lots and lots of stuff, having us see those things and have us think about what we want in second hours. And we have an advantage over most people covering an event is that we have a show that happens every day and we can always put them into a second hour. So that's the thing that we're going to be looking at for most of those things. If we think it's worth interviewing for more than a couple minutes, we're probably going to just try to get them to come on. Next question.
Our next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. How are we going to get the LiveU feeds back into the Office Hours 2 system?
Yeah, assuming that the LiveU all comes through, which we should know next week, there's a server that goes on into our setup in San Rafael, and that's going to output either a 1080p or a 4K HDR stream out of it. And then we have to pass that back in so that the panelists can see it. The tricky part right now is figuring out how we're going to cut it so that you get the full quality out of it and not go back through a system that is basically SDR. And so I'm still thinking about that. And until I see it, it's going to be a little hard. I think that the reason that I'm thinking about putting another mixer or another switcher downstream is so that we cut the whole show without that content. And then we have another switcher that's sitting in Rec 2020. And, so the tricky part is the constellation, which we're trying to get to the bottom of. The constellation has a tendency to want to change states based on what's coming in. So if you give it any 709, it goes, I want 709. So what I'm looking at is having a second constellation there that is, we know that everything going to it is Rec 2020, and it's going into there and it's corrected for that. And so then as it gets that footage, and we've corrected the panel and we push them in. So then the only thing we're giving up there is we don't have a lot of pictures of cutting that audio, that video in. If we can figure it out, we'll do it another way. But I think that right now, without a hard switch inside of that, there's ways for us to test it. I mean, we're going to test some of this stuff. We could correct every panelist to HDR. We have that now. We have the capability of just turning them all into HDR as they go into the system. But I'm not sure if the system will see it correctly. So we're going to be doing some more tests over the next month to figure that out, whether we can deliver that. We're trying to get all the pieces in one place in the next couple of weeks to get to the bottom of that. Next question.
Our next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. If someone, Blackmagic Design or Apple, does a press event right before NAB, how might we best include that? Maybe an expert panel discussing the implications?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, if we have enough team members, then usually a team member will want to go to the press event. It's tough when doing any type of video inside of a press event is really tough unless they do something kind of viral, like bring Star Wars robots onto the thing or anything like that. So it's best to have like small recaps after that. So yeah, this press event happened. They talked about this. They talked about this. And I find that that's the best way to do it, is just to collect the information afterwards and then talk about it and then just give some quick opinion. And that's probably where the panel is really going to shine, is through those press events.
You go, Bill.
Yeah, that's one of the things, I spend a lot of time as press, and to do a good job of that, you're going to come into the event and you're going to be there for a half an hour or an hour or whatever it is. You normally would be taking notes. You'd be distilling it down into the top 10 points that they made there, the introductions that they did, and then you'd be consolidating that into a live hit where you explained those 5 or 7 things, and then you're done. But it requires that whole hour, because they usually reveal those things over time. So it's not very efficient in a live broadcasting circumstance to cover a big announcement like that. It's much better to understand what the bullet points are of the announcement a little bit afterwards and craft your content from that. That's been my experience. I've sat in a lot of these things and I'm going, okay, I got 3 things out of that's really useful. And it took me 90 minutes to go there, listen to it all, and then put the piece together.
Yeah, I will say that we may get pretty aggressive about this just to see what happens. So if we see press events or we see things that are there, or parties or anything else that we want to go to, if we do finalize all these the LiveU opportunities, I got a way to do it. So we're just going to go and go there, cover it. If we're not broadcasting otherwise, again, we may start pushing a lot of stuff to YouTube that's not trying to go through the OH system, just so I don't have to put more pressure on the existing pressure on the OH, on the back end team. So there may be some stuff that we do that way when we just push it up. We have a viewing, we push it into Mokana. People can still ask questions and we can discuss it. And there can be a lot of other things that we're doing there. But then and then the cool thing is that it could also go into after hours so that people can sit there and do kind of that second year experience that we've been playing with. So we can all talk about it and talk about things that we're seeing there. So we're going to experiment with a lot of different formats of how we cover things. And, because it could be just after hours when we're not broadcasting these shows, we may have people just wandering around with LiveUs, going to things and setting up a little bit to just show you those things. And people can just be the peanut gallery talking about it and looking at it. There's no reason not to. We want to see how far we can push this coverage and how far we can push the interactivity on it. We only get to do it when it's there. So we're, and I'm, pretty much flattening my system so that I can, be covering this. So it'll be a big push. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is back, and he asked this question: for the post segments, what editing pipeline will we be using?
We're going to look at who's doing what. So that's why we're cutting off after today. We're going to cut off adding more people, and then we're going to see what we can look at there. We want to talk to folks about what they've done in the past. The easiest one for us to do would probably be Final Cut, because we can, what I want to do is build some templates in Motion so that when you want to add lower thirds and other things, it's already standardized. You just add the plugin and type in the things that you want, and it's automatically formatted to what it needs to be. That's probably the easiest way to do it. But we'll see what everybody has and what they want to use. I don't have a problem with using multiple systems. In some ways, it gives us feedback on what was good. I can say that in the past, I've used almost every system to cover this stuff. And the one that you really want to use for news gathering and delivery is Final Cut, because it's about 10 times faster than by the time you get set up to do an edit in Premiere or Resolve, you're done. Like in Final Cut, for this kind of editing, this kind of like, boom, I got to get it in, I got to get it out. I can have templates built, I can do all those things. So, but we'll see what we end up doing there. Next question.
Our next question comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. What does a day of volunteering look like for someone helping remotely or in person?
We're still defining that. So the next thing we're going to do is we have in the database, we have we're asking people when they're available. There's going to be a lot of we're going to start building timelines based on those availabilities. We're going to start reaching out to people specifically. The biggest thing to do, you can sign up right now, and I would come to the Monday meeting. We'll make sure that you're all invited if you've signed up for that. is whatever you say you're going to do next week, that you do it. You don't have to say too much, but we need you to show up. So the hardest part with volunteering, what I will say is that it's fine to sign up. Anybody can sign up, but once you've defined what you're going to do for the show, if you don't do it, then the chances of being on another team will be very low. So, because we just needed to know who we can depend on to do that. So, but we're going to start, we're really figuring all of those pieces out. I think that what we want to do for the remote folks is for them to be taking a lot of this content and compiling it and building out these videos that we can put out. Again, some of them being shorts, some of them being 16:9 compilations. We're going to put out a lot of those things, gathering and organizing some of the B-roll that we're taking out in stills and trying to figure out the note structure of how we're going to cover those things, doing research on what booths that we think are interesting. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and if you're in person, we're going to give you a nice little set of handcuffs. And we're going to cuff you. No, I'm kidding. So what? Once again, it's you never know what's going to happen. I mean, there was one time we had a show where two guys had to leave because an emergency happened back home, and then we lost half our crew. And then you just have to be able to shift a little bit. Once again, be able to catch the camera, but still know that this is what your main role is when it comes to being there in person.
Yeah, real quick, Bill. I'm going to try to move.
Yeah, my experience has always been, I get up reasonably early, try to get on my transportation mode to there, because getting into NAB was often for me the monorail or meeting a group of people to get a van in. You work really hard up until you take a break to eat something. You catch as catch can. Often it's show floor food because it's really hard to go anyplace else. Then at somewhere around 4 or 4:30, I would break, because the other big part of NAB has always happened at night. There are all these presentations, all these announcements, all these special things. And so I would go from there, cover things like the super meet and things like that. And about 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, I would crawl back to the hotel room and do it all over again the next day. It's a pretty intense schedule.
Next question.
Our next question is from Jesse Mills in San Francisco, California. Why would someone want to hear all the surrounding noise at a busy conference and possibly miss the primary message due to the elevated noise and chatter inclusion of an immersive microphone?
Well, we're going to find out. So we're going to do it and see what happens. It may not be there. Again, what we found in doing a lot of these things, and we may turn it off. Again, we're going to experiment with that process. But I think that there is going to be something about you feeling more like you're there. We're really trying to create this feeling of you being there. And I think that we can mix and match this with a high, an SM58 with a wireless that's really up in front of somebody. You're going to get a nice clear centered channel delivery. But I think that there's something about feeling like you're there and it's not just deadened and you don't hear anything. And we're going to play with it because no one's ever done it before. Next question.
This is from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Alberta. And he asks, I'm keenly interested in hearing the 5.1 surround. What would you recommend for listening?
Yeah, you have to listen in an OTT box. Apple TV, I think the Android solutions, those things, the YouTube stuff all has to be, the only way you'll hear 5.1 is in those, and everything else will get folded down to stereo. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is asking, Alex, what would make Final Cut faster than Resolve's own cut page?
No channel, no tracks. Like it's just the dynamic tracking is so much faster than everything else available. We'll just keep moving because we're running out of time. Next question.
Also from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Alberta, would the surround be at a fixed location in the hall or will it travel with the crew?
We're going to try to have it travel with the crew. That's going to be the game. And again, no one's ever done it before. I like to do things that no one's ever done before. So it may turn out to be a failure, but we may learn some stuff that's pretty interesting. Next question.
We're back with Douglas Carmichael. Would a HyperDeck be as useful as a B deck for extra content to bring into the show as needed?
The easiest thing to do is use software-based. So whether we're using QLab or MIDI or Softron or something like that, it's much easier to use software-based than HyperDecks because we don't have to conform all the video and audio. We can just simply throw it in a second before we needed it and push it out and jump to playlists and so on and so forth. Last question.
Also, Douglas Carmichael, how will we be handling RFIs during the event? Multiple shifts of documenters and periodic RFI review?
we're probably not going to review a lot of RFI. I mean, we'll be talking about it informally, but I think that the big RFI will be Friday, and then talking about it over the next. We'll have probably a couple weeks of talking about what worked and didn't work in those areas. So, but those will be important for those listening. RFIs are room for improvement, so we'll be looking at what we liked and didn't like in that specific coverage. So anyway, it's great. It's a good hour. I think we've covered a lot. Again, I'm going to put out an announcement on Discord, but it goes out on the email every day. This is the last day that there is to sign up for it. We'll make sure that everybody gets invited to the meeting on Monday if you sign up. And but we're going to start really nailing down exactly what's going to happen over those time periods starting next week, and exactly what those processes are. So so stay tuned for that. And we're pretty excited about it. And again, it won't be perfect. We'll fail a lot, and that's fine. Like we can refund the sponsors, which aren't any. So we're learning how to cover these things. We are, figuring it out, and we're going to take a lot of chances. I don't get to do that very much in my day-to-day life, is take chances. So we're going to take a lot of chances, and some of it will work, and we're just going to throw a lot against the wall and see what sticks. All right. Well, thanks so much to for the producers for all the great questions. And a reminder that asking those questions before 5:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time gives us a lot more time to think about your questions. It definitely improves the quality of the questions that are asked early. You can ask them all the way through the show, but really asking if you have a complicated one or one that we don't answer very often, or the type of question we don't answer very often. Asking them early really makes a difference, and we really appreciate everyone that's been picking up the speed on that over the time. The producers, and thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And a reminder that panelists, if you want to come in early, about 6:30, we're starting to between 6 and 6:15. We're starting to kind of go through those questions until 6:30. You don't have to be on the panel to be part of the camaraderie of figuring out these answers. So anyway, you're more than welcome to, if you're a panelist already. Not everyone can jump in, but if you've been a panelist on the show, you can jump in early and then drop out at 6:30 if you choose to. And then thanks, of course, to the incredible backend crew that both is working on the scheduling, the meetings, the design, the after hours, the figuring all these bits and pieces out, developing, running the live show, figuring out what worked in the live show. There's this huge group of people that are making this show work, and we really just appreciate all of your work, and what you do here. All right, let's go ahead and jump into after hours. I had more to say, but I lost my page. I had moved it around, and then I looked down. It's like, I still can't find my page. What happened? I didn't tell people bananas. 91,000 miles, 147,000 kilometers, 830 million bananas for scale. So many. 3.7 times.